Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, as indirect negotiations between Israel and Hamas kick off in Egypt, we ask, could we be on the cusp of an end to the war in Gaza? And how close to a breakthrough could we be? And what next for the hostages still being held there in Gaza? Plus, as the French President Emmanuel Macron loses his fifth Prime Minister in the space of 2 years, we ask a French senator, what's wrong with French politics? Hello and welcome to the programme. We are just 1 day away from marking 2 years since the start of the war in Gaza. 2 years of destruction and immense loss of life. But how close are we to finding a diplomatic solution to the conflict? Well, delegations from Hamas and Israel, along with mediators, are gathering in Egypt for negotiations. Well, the US President Donald Trump has urged all parties to move fast. Let's take a listen.
Deadline for Hamas to release the hostages.
Yeah, we're going to very quickly. We had some very good meetings. The countries of the world, a lot of the countries surrounding Israel, frankly, Muslim, Arab, and many others have had great meetings with Hamas, and it looks like it's working. So we'll wait for a little while, see how it all turns out.
When will the administration begin firing?
I think it'll work very quickly. I think it's going to go very quickly. The meetings seem to be very good. We'll find out. We'll let you know soon.
US President Donald Trump speaking there. Well, while efforts to end the war in Gaza appear to be underway, the human toll continues to rise, with at least 20 people killed across the war-torn strip during the course of today alone. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Hisham Mehanna, who is a spokesperson for the International Committee of the Red Cross in Gaza. He joins us from Deir al-Balah, which is halfway between the cities of Khan Yunis and Gaza City. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us, Hisham. We're being told that the ICRC is ready to act as a neutral humanitarian intermediary to help bring Israeli hostages home, also facilitate the release of Palestinian detainees being held by Israel. What role do you envisage? How do you do that?
Hello, Tom, and thank you for having me. Our role is basically a neutral humanitarian intermediary. We have practiced this role many times throughout our work in Israel and the occupied territories since 1967. And only during this conflict, twice, during the first and the second ceasefire, the entire world watched our work, our dedication. We have always since day one reiterated our call for the full unconditional release of all the hostages in a dignified manner. Now, there's ongoing negotiations. We don't take part in any negotiations. Once parties to the conflict realize an agreement, announce it, provide all the necessary guarantees, we stand more than ready to start facilitating the implementation of this agreement according to the humanitarian principles. So hopefully we will witness and hear about such good news that is awaited by millions in the region, and especially for the families of the hostages, for the families also of the Palestinian detainees in Gaza and the West Bank, and for the plus 2 million people in Gaza who are waiting for this this horrifying daily routine to just come to an end.
So clearly an extremely complex role for the ICRC to play, and one you, as you say, you've already played before. Do you envisage this happening gradually over a period of days, or would you imagine that those 20, we think, living hostages be released all at once? How do you see this happening?
I don't have the information yet. Hopefully it will happen, and what we care about is that, first of all, it happens anytime soon, and it happens in a dignified manner. We stand more than ready to start immediately. We are ready to start now. We're just waiting for this agreement to be announced. And hopefully this time it will also include ending this war once and for all, because the level of suffering we have witnessed over the past 2 years, and tomorrow marks the second mark of this conflict, it has to come to an end once and for all.
What's your hunch? How far off are we from the beginning of the release of the hostages? Could it happen this week?
If it happens this week, we will be happy. If it happens tomorrow, we will be happier, because we believe that this is the key for ending this nightmare. We want to reunite families together. We want to bring the hostages, both dead and alive, back to their families, to be reunited with and to be buried in a dignified manner. The same thing we want for the Palestinian detainees, who we haven't been able to visit since October 23. We haven't been able to visit them and to assess their conditions of detention and bring family news to their families. We also would like to witness a family reunification, but also what's even more importantly is to consider the fact that there is urgent need for immediate aid to enter Gaza, to enter unimpededly and to be in a sustainable fashion, with safety and security for our teams, to bring it for those who are in need. We managed to bring in aid today into Gaza City after less than 1 week of temporarily suspending work from Gaza City office because of the intensification of the military operations. Like life-saving medical supplies, equipment, and personnel were moved from southern Gaza into Gaza City after many days. The fighting is still ongoing. There are still civilians who are being killed and injured on a daily basis, and this should come to an end anytime soon.
Right. I mean, obviously, to facilitate the hostage release, the bombing has to stop. President Trump has ordered that the bombing stop, but that hasn't happened, has it?
Unfortunately, we can still hear sounds of explosions, and we still hear news of killing, of civilians being killed, and this forced displacement is still ongoing. So technically, nothing has changed. But what I can assure you that everyone in Gaza now is hopeful to hear about this news, including the ICRC team, including the ICRC family of their staff, and everyone. And I'm sure that also this is a very much anticipated news by the families of the hostages.
Have you got any information as to how many hostages we're talking about here? Because we're told there are 20 living hostages, 28 deceased. Is that the same tally you have?
I cannot confirm such information, because we have an ongoing bilateral dialogue with parties to the conflict, with both Israel and Hamas at the top ICRC level, and in Tel Aviv, and Cairo, and Geneva, and Qatar, and other countries, because we want to maintain this engagement directly with both Israel and Hamas, with the mediators and the countries who have the influence and effort. This is the same that we have been doing for almost 2 years now, and hopefully this would come with a positive outcome.
Okay, let's talk a bit more about the humanitarian situation across Gaza. As you were saying a moment ago, you had to suspend operations in Gaza City last week. Just tell us how much of a presence you have elsewhere in the Gaza Strip and what your main focuses of activity are.
The last time I was in Gaza City was last week. A few days before, we had to temporarily suspend operations from our office there. And what we could witness, hear day and night is massive explosions that could shake our building. And these detonations or these explosions took place kilometers away from our office. And the dust the gunpowder would cover the area, that sometimes we had to wear masks. So I cannot possibly imagine how that would be for the civilians in the surrounding of these explosions and this fighting. Civilians we have been speaking to and talking to, including medical staff who are working from hospitals that are striving to continue saving lives, for civilians who are displaced in shelter and camps that we are trying to support. They cannot move. They cannot move because they cannot afford the transportation costs, and because they don't have any shelter in southern Gaza. Southern Gaza is also catastrophic, because the majority of the population are concentrated in a very ever-shrinking space without the bare minimum access to essential services. No clean water, sewage are covering all the streets and sidewalks where people are actually displaced, and they have even no shelter items. They don't have tents. We're approaching another winter, and so far there has been no preparation of winterization. There's no new tents. There's no even heavy clothes for the vulnerable, including the children. And people are still recovering from an acute food crisis, given the ease of restrictions that we have witnessed in the last few weeks and months. Our field hospital in Rafah, which is the only fully operational field hospital in that area, continues to deal with casualties that pour in from there. So in total and in general, Gaza, the situation in Gaza has not changed. It continues to be dire, continues to be bloody, unfortunately, and there's still hope that must be taken in consideration for all the decision makers.
I mean, in terms of, you paint a bleak picture about the food and water security situation for the average person in Gaza today. I mean, what sort of a percentage of what they need are they actually getting when it comes to nutrition and hydration?
Has been never enough. And this is the main challenge that we have been facing besides the security, the direct security threats to our teams and premises. It's that it's never enough. As long as there's hostilities, as long as there's destruction, as long as there's forced displacement, there will be more needs to meet. And given there is these still ongoing restrictions on the entry of aid, if we take out the period of the ceasefire, which witnessed an intensification of the entry of humanitarian aid, it was never enough to meet the needs of over 2 million people living in constant displacement without the proper, safe access to essential services. So people cannot cope to live like this. It's not as they were destined to live like this. They are entitled to live with dignity. They are entitled to receive humanitarian aid safely and with dignity under the international humanitarian law.
Israel and officials in Israel tell us often on this channel that all the reports about famine in Gaza are, to all intents and purposes, fake news. What do you say to that?
The ICRC is not an organization that is experienced in a declaration of famine, but the IPC report that came out recently, just less than a month ago, must have been treated seriously and should pave the way forward towards ending this crisis. There is a food crisis in Gaza. There are people who are struggling with acute malnutrition. We have received patients in our own field hospital in Rafah that have shown syndrome of such, including a pregnant woman, including newborns and children. It cannot be just denied. And whatever that entered Gaza in terms of food was never enough. It's not about the quantity only. It's about the safe access to what gets inside. It's about to deliver this for all who are desperate for it in the north, in the south, and the middle.
We're told that 67,000 Palestinians have been killed during these last 24 months. I don't know if you have another number, but what's certain is that people in Gaza have been living surrounded by explosions, destruction, hunger, disease, attending funerals, probably on a very regular basis. How psychologically damaged would you say the 2.2 million people of Gaza actually are right now?
I cannot describe it. No one can describe it. It will take many, many years to recover from the scars that are left by this conflict, because people have lost their loved ones. Parents have lost their children. Children have had to bury their own parents in the backyard of their homes or on the streets. This is something that you can never heal from and never forget. People have went missing and their families until now don't know their whereabouts. It's an open cut wound until they can get reunited together, if they are still alive and lucky, or if they can receive the human remains of them and provide the proper dignified burial so that they can mourn. There is no recovery from this. Absolutely, there is no winner from this horrifying conflict. And back to your question about the numbers of those who have been killed, I think it's intolerable. I think it's unacceptable. And it doesn't matter how many people get killed every day, as much as it's important to stop this from continue happening in the future. This is why we have been calling for a ceasefire. This is why we have been calling for ending this fight, and to realize, only political efforts are proven to be effective in ending this. The political solution only, not the humanitarian situation, not the military situation.
Okay, just lastly, Hisham, and briefly, if you don't mind. I mean, President Trump says he's optimistic that, there will be results from the diplomatic efforts that are being made, does it feel like to people in Gaza that there is now a ray of light at the end of the tunnel?
Everyone is hopeful. I can assure you that even those patients and casualties at the hospitals or the remains of the hospitals that are continue to partially function, even these families whose loved ones are either held captive or in detention, they are still hopeful that they will have their own loved ones between their arms anytime soon, or get the remains of their the remains of their loved ones to bury them properly in a dignified manner. Everyone is hopeful despite the pain, despite the agony, despite the suffering, and this hope must be respected and must be turned into a reality anytime soon.
Hisham Mehanna, spokesperson for the International Committee of the Red Cross in Deir al-Balah in Gaza. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Well, we can speak now to Hassan Asfour, who is a senior Oslo-Era negotiator for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, who took part in the Camp David negotiations in 2000. So you were also a member of the Palestinian National Council between the years 1984 to 2018. Thank you very much indeed for being with us here on Al Arabiya English. Indirect talks between Hamas and Israel are taking place in Egypt. President Trump is urging everyone to move fast. Does it look to you like there is now the momentum to turn this 20-point plan into reality?
First of all, my greetings to you and to your viewers, and I also pay tribute to the martyrs of the Palestinian people and to the sacrifices that have been made for the Palestinian people. Apparently, it is the first time that we see this scale of international momentum, not only after this 2 years of the war. Since 2007, there has been no serious movements about the Palestinian cause at all. It is the first time that we see the whole world at large, including Iran, that have been supporting the political move toward reaching an end to the genocide in Gaza. The content of this peace plan is still ambiguous, and it looks like it is quite unorthodox. It is intended to stop the genocide, and hopefully it will create an opportunity. However, this opportunity is not linked with the Palestinian entity. It focuses on the Gaza Strip having a transitional phase and under an international custody headed by the board peace, and also there should be some Palestinian participation. So it is a kind of unprecedented rule. Even from the experience of Iraq during the era of Bremer, we haven't seen this complicated kind of rule. But the momentum that we see now in order to respond with this plan and to stop the genocide is quite substantial, where everyone seems just to be supporting this initiative. But nobody is just talking about the details. Until now, President Trump has laid out a plan about just the redeployment within the Gaza Strip. And he's talking about a yellow line. But during the yellow line stage, there are many questions to be asked. Who will be ruling that area if the Israeli forces will withdraw? Whether there will be any other forces also there, or a civilian administration or transitional administration. So there are many complex issues that have to be resolved. I think this momentum is mainly linked to stop the genocide more than it is about the content of this peace plan.
Okay, so you make a lot of important points there, sir. Clearly, the momentum is there, as you say. This is, as you said as well, an unorthodox approach. Well, until now, nothing else has worked, so perhaps that's a good sign as well. But let me ask you, despite your reservations, were you surprised that Hamas partially agreed to this 20-point plan?
In my personal capacity, no, I wasn't surprised because it's not up to Hamas. Even the statement that has been released, it wasn't by Hamas. When the team of from Turkey met with their counterparts in Egypt and Qatar, they have issued that. So therefore, it wasn't a coincidence by President Trump to thank President Erdogan for his effort in order to get the approval from Hamas. But we can remember how he thanked Turkey, especially for their efforts after Hamas approval. And he said Turkey played a very important role in order to put the pressure on Hamas. Hamas has been doomed to agree, and everyone who knows Hamas, they know that this is not the language that Hamas speak. Hamas has been doomed just to accept that. Even the leadership of Hamas have not understood the content of the peace plan, which delved just into many details, such as the peace board. They believe that this is only a formal matter, but we are talking about an integrated approach for ruling Gaza. It is not like just answering question by yes and or no. So therefore, it was just a kind of it wasn't a kind of surprise because it wasn't issued by Hamas at all.
It's interesting to see who's present in Cairo, taking part in the negotiations. There's the US Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff. There's Jared Kushner, who is the president's son-in-law. There's the Qatari foreign minister. It's a wide-ranging and almost unlikely casting for negotiation. Do you think the right people are in place?
In principle, yes. I think that with the dreamer representing Netanyahu personally, and I suppose that he will be joining the talks tomorrow. So Kushner, remember, he was the mastermind of this plan. And it all started in February 2024. And Kushner just was the one who orchestrated everything. And this means that this plan was just envisioned even before the war started in Gaza. And this indicates that there is something way just bigger in terms of the scale that for those events that have been happening. And that's why the talks have not only began recently, but I think that the momentum that we have been seeing recently is exceptional. And now everyone is asking about the details, especially that Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar have really put real efforts into this momentum. And Israel has to agree at the end of the day. And but everyone who believes that Israel might really disagree, then nobody understands the real equation. Netanyahu, remember, has deceived many American presidents, and I just witnessed this by myself when he cheated President Clinton, and therefore the United States just decided just to bring it to an end. And therefore, we hope that history will not repeat itself. And now, remember that Netanyahu's just position inside the government is quite fragile. And I believe the talks that are starting in Sharm el-Sheikh could really steer the way for President Trump in order to implement the peace plan as announced yesterday.
Okay, I just wonder what you think Hamas is going to do with regards to the hostages. Do you anticipate all of them being released, or do you think Hamas will decide in the first instance to release only some of them?
Hamas can never manipulate with this plan because the first item states that all hostages should be released. Even though that Hamas might find some pretext talking about the situation on the ground, but now Trump personally believes that this is the crux of the whole peace deal, and it is the important point to release the hostages, especially that he is keeping an eye on the Nobel Peace Prize that is expected to take place in Oslo on Friday. But it is not an easy process. Hamas does not have just a stationary organization. They have some branches in Egypt, others in Qatar, and those who are inside Gaza. And therefore, the cost will be quite hefty in case Hamas just tries to manipulate with this approach.
Okay, and if on the Israeli side the hostages are freed, but Israel continues bombarding Gaza, what sort of a response do you think that will trigger from the rest of the world, in particular the Arab world?
It will be really tragic, and this is what I mentioned in my article, which was released last week. It is the first time ever I see negotiations at this scale and at this momentum, where the assurance is only the statement of President Trump. We don't have any assurances at all here, except that it is only President Trump who is the chairman of the board peace and who is the orchestrator of this peace. And now, if we are just to make a statue for President Trump as the days of pharaohs, then he is entitled to receive one. I believe that it is the roadmap of President Trump, but unfortunately there are no assurances except for the verbal statements and the ethics of President Trump, and I don't personally believe that he holds all those good ethics.
And I would like to ask you, the day after holding talks with President Trump and agreeing to the 20-point plan, Prime Minister Netanyahu said there's never going to be a Palestinian state, which is one of the points in the 20-point plan, a pathway to a Palestinian state. What's your interpretation of that?
If you read the peace plan articles, there is no reference to the Palestinian state, but there is also just only a likelihood of establishing the Palestinian state. They are talking about a pathway toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. This is also another vague area from the peace plan. President Trump does not talk about the Palestinian state per se, but is talking about a pathway that could lead to the establishment of the Palestinian state. And this, anyway, could be one of the hurdles that could be placed in the way. And even President Mahmoud Abbas also just flagged this point. We know that there was just a hailing and a welcome by the Palestinian people for to end the genocide and the occupying force. But we don't know at all whether there is really an explicit reference or mentioning to the establishment of the Palestinian state. It is left and it remains to be seen in the future. And this could be one of the serious points that has been ignored or someone has turned blind eye on it.
Okay, and just lastly, before we finish, if this round of talks in Sharm el-Sheikh finishes without any results, what do you think will be the next steps? What happens then?
Let me tell you that it is really hard that this round of talks in Sharm el-Sheikh will end without any tangible result. I think that there must be some kind of a progress. However, there could be some delay in terms of time frame for the implementation. We know that this will not be just a smooth sailing for the leadership of Hamas at all, because all the pressure is now on Hamas, because as the main condition is to release the hostages. But with that said, Hamas, the peace plan has not mentioned on whether just the ceasefire will happen when the hostages are released first, or which one will come first. And therefore, I think that this could be an advantage for Netanyahu so that he could put more pressure on Hamas. And I believe Hamas has to think it twice before it reject the idea, because the price could be heavily as stated by President Trump on the 29th of September.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you speaking to us. We're out of time. Thank you very much indeed. Hassan Asfour, Senior Palestinian Negotiator. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir. Let's get more now. We can speak to Gidi Grinstein, who is a former Israeli peace negotiator under Prime Minister Ehud Barak. He was also involved in the negotiations with the PLO and at Yasser Arafat in the early 2000s. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. I expect you're watching what's happening in Cairo like the rest of us. Does it look to you like we're on the cusp of the end of the war in Gaza?
Thank you very much for having me, Tom. And yes, I think that we are coming closer and closer to a deal that may end the war in Gaza. I think President Trump, through a series of statements over the last couple of weeks, actually converged the parties in a very, I would say, aggressive mediating approach. First of all, he said no annexation, no Israeli annexation in the West Bank, which took off a major concern for Arab parties who would have been part of the concluding deal. Another major statement is that he said that Israel will not be allowed to annex any part of the Gaza Strip, which speaks to a major demand, a core demand of Hamas. And then, of course, setting the expectations of the parties about a two-phase deal. Phase one is the hostages, the release of the Israeli hostages still held in Gaza after almost 2 years. October 7 is going to be 2 years. And then in exchange for Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli jails, including a very significant numbers of what we call heavyweights, which means people that were convicted and are in jail for really horrific murders. Some of them are orchestrators of suicide bombings that claim the lives of dozens and dozens of civilians. So in this respect, President Trump has already kind of signaled the outline of what would be a ceasefire, exchange, and then a war-ending deal.
Okay, so President Trump has set out some red lines, if you like, and, you know, clearly those talks have just got started. What sort of assurances, though, do you think Hamas is likely to seek from Israel? Because, I mean, looking at it from the outside, I mean, in Hamas's situation, were all the hostages to be freed, they would have no more bargaining chips, to put it crudely. So what assurances do you think they will seek from Israel?
I think that they're actually seeking the assurances from the Americans, not from Israel, because there's obviously absolute distrust between Israel and Hamas at this phase of the war, in this phase of this relationship. I'm just qualifying because in the past, Israel and Hamas in Gaza did have understandings around movement of people, movement of goods across the border, traffic, moving in of money, and even some restraint about use of military force in the engagement. All that belongs to the past. Now Israel and Hamas are in a condition of total lack of trust and absolute direct confrontation, what you may call a total war between the parties. So Hamas will expect guarantees from the Americans, especially since Hamas holds Israel to be the one who violated the ceasefire of January that was signed in January 2025, and Israel walked away from the ceasefire about 6 weeks later in March 2025. So Hamas wants assurances for the Americans. What are these assurances? They are the following. Number one, that eventually Israel will fully withdraw from Gaza. Number two, that Gaza will eventually be run by a self-governing Palestinian entity. They've already said yes to what is called a technocratic government, or a government of technocrats. What we mean by that is people whose credibility and qualifications for the job are the ability to build and run systems like healthcare, welfare, education, obviously the reconstruction of Gaza. So that will be a second major plea. A third thing is that once they leave Gaza, they have immunity. In this respect, I think that Trump understandings with Qatar, that where the United States is pledged to the security of Qatar, to the invulnerability of the Qatar sovereign space after Israel's attack on the Hamas leadership in Doha, that I hold this to be part of the deal, meaning it is essential for the Qataris to be able to say to Hamas leaders, if you come out of Gaza and you come to Qatar, you'll be in a safe haven, meaning if you, especially if you really live up to your pledge to stop the use of terrorism. That will be, I think, the third. The fourth element, which is very important for them, is that essentially, as Gaza is being reconstructed, I think that they will want to see that some of the civilian infrastructure of Hamas is integrated into the governing body of Gaza, but that is further down the road.
Okay, you make a lot of key points there, and one of them, which is not going to be lost on our audience, is the fact that one of the members of the delegation, the leader of the delegation of Hamas, is of course Khalil al-Hayya, who survived that assassination attempt in Doha. Given the level of mistrust you were talking about, it's hard to imagine how they can achieve anything. But as you're saying, it's going to be very much down to the Americans to mediate between the two sides. Just with regards to that strike on Doha, do you think it was in some ways a catalyst to perhaps getting us to where we are today? Do you think that will go down in history as having been some sort of a turning point?
I think it's actually almost a pivotal moment in this whole conflict, because to the extent that I can judge from the American side effectively probably thought to themselves, this is going too far. When two of our allies, as much as they have tension between them, when two of our allies are beginning to exchange blows, military blows, on Doha, which is nearby a U.S. military base, this really disrupts the American order in the Middle East. The other thing that is of severe concern to the Americans is the fact that this strike came exactly at the time when Hamas was supposed to be convening in order to consider its response to the proposal of President Trump, which is probably not that different of what we're seeing right now. So basically, it was a major disruption to the process of negotiations and also to the stature of Qatar as one of the key mediators in this, in these efforts to end the war. So, and I think that the response of the Qataris was, I would say, quite remarkable. They got on a plane, they went to Washington, and within 36 hours, they were able to turn the table on Israel diplomatically, meaning Prime Minister Netanyahu, of course, he said that the strike in Doha was not coordinated with the Americans, but he did claim to have the backing of the United States. Meanwhile, 48 hours later, 72 hours later, President Trump is already meeting with Arab leaders and agreeing on a set of principles that will eventually play a pivotal, a very significant role in shaping Trump's 20-point plan. Obviously, after that, there was an Israeli diplomatic intervention during the UN General Assembly that pushed the 20 points of Trump, again, a little bit in the direction of Israel, or significantly in the direction of Israel, if you listen to our prime minister. But anyhow, the Qatari leadership was able to use the attack on Doha, first of all, to push the negotiations toward a deal significantly forward, and second, to extract from the Americans unprecedented pledges to the integrity of their sovereignty. And that's also a big achievement for them. So yes, in those two respects, I think it was pivotal. I think the Americans signaled to the Israelis, created for Israel a red line, which means you cannot attack even your worst enemies in the territory of our allies. This just cannot work for us as a superpower that tries to be the hegemonic power in the Middle East.
Let's talk about what's going to be under discussion in Egypt. So obviously the hostages are the initial focus. Then if we look further on down the 20 points in the plan, of course, this request, this demand that Hamas disarm, but Hamas saying we won't disarm until we get a state of our own, a Palestinian state. How much of a spoiler do you think this demand that Hamas disarm and their subsequent rejection is going to be?
First of all, I want to elaborate a little bit of what does it mean for Hamas to be taken out of Gaza. There are 4 elements to this process. Number 1 is, of course, the dismantling of the armed capabilities of Hamas. We'll get back to that in a moment. The second is the political level, and that is that Hamas will not be able to participate in the Palestinian governing body, whether appointed or elected. I want to remind the audience that this is a provision in the Oslo Accords, meaning a party that does not accept the Oslo Accords cannot participate in the Palestinian Legislative Council. The problem is that this specific provision was ignored by the Americans, believe it or not, during the Bush administration. And they're the ones who pushed to allow for Hamas to participate in the elections. We could be seen, I'm talking about January 2006, could be seen as the beginning of the starting point of the tremendous crisis that we're in right now. So security and politics. The third element that needs to happen is that the social system of Hamas will be replaced by the education, welfare, and healthcare infrastructure of the self-governing Palestinian body. And the fourth element that has to be dismantled is the economic mechanism, the economic infrastructure of Hamas that relied primarily on their ability to control the borders and therefore the trafficking and the smuggling into Gaza, and also to control the labor pyramids into Israel that were a major source of income, and third, of course, to collect taxes within Gaza. So all these 3 elements are gone. So if I ask myself, are we on our way to dismantling Hamas as we understand it as an organization in Gaza? I would say yes. The economic component is no longer there. The social component should be replaced by the self-governing Palestinian body. Of course, in the agreement itself, in the 20 points, there's no participation of Hamas in the Palestinian political system. And now we're left with the security component. Now, there is a level. Hamas was a terror army that established itself in Gaza. This is the Israeli perspective. Hamas has been severely decimated and diminished. All of its strategic capabilities are probably gone. A lot of the tunnel infrastructure is destroyed. So it's what we call the frameworks, okay? The fighting frameworks, like the brigades and the battalions and even the platoons. All of this is now dismantled. So we're left with groups of fighters. And beyond a certain point, it gravitates from an army challenge to a law enforcement challenge. At that point, it should be the responsibility of the international force and the Palestinian police in Gaza to take care of the last remaining Hamas people who refuse to hand over the guns. I have to say that Israel wants the demilitarization of Gaza, but at the same time, Israel wants to enforce the demilitarization of Gaza, and that requires the police and military force. So there is a tension there. And I think that at some point, the Americans will turn to Israel and will say, which is it? Absolute demilitarization? Or do you want a security force, which is effectively a Palestinian security force in the longer term that governed Gaza, similar to the West Bank? So I think that, but the overarching principle should be the unitary of force under the Palestinian government, which is the same principle that is being applied in Lebanon, which underlies the demand to dismantle the military capabilities of Hezbollah. This is the overarching principle and should apply in Gaza, it should apply in the West Bank, it should apply in Lebanon, and in fact, also in Syria and everywhere.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, we heard what sounded like Prime Minister Netanyahu rejecting one of the points of the 20-point plan, that very next day after having discussed it with President Trump, namely, he said a Palestinian state, that's not going to happen. He said that in Hebrew the day after he'd spoken with President Trump. But how much pressure is Netanyahu under domestically to reach some sort of a deal right now?
So Netanyahu is under tremendous pressure to reach a deal now, and these are things that are being seen as by many in Israel. Of course, Netanyahu has a very strong base that supports the claim that there will not be a Palestinian state. That base also rejects the role of the Palestinian Authority. At the same time, there are a lot of people in Israel who say, hey, this is just another political trick by Netanyahu to prevent a deal, a war-ending deal, which he fundamentally doesn't want. So that part of the opposition claims that Netanyahu is using all these long-term political demands in order to undermine the short-term deal. This is the claim against Netanyahu. I think that what we have seen from President Trump is that President Trump, in this current proposal, effectively collapsed the near-term deal of hostages and prisoners and redeployment and realignment of the IDF in Gaza with the longer-term arrangements for the reconstruction of Gaza, for establishing a self-governing Palestinian entity, and just enough statements about the long-term vision, the permanent status of Gaza. The key statement that President Trump put in is that the Palestinians have the right to self-determination. And that is absolutely crucial and important. I think even sort of historically important, because many of the people behind the current Israeli government reject the notion that there are two indigenous people in the land of Israel, what we call the land of Israel, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, and therefore that the Palestinian people does not deserve the right to self-determination. Meaning when Trump says that the Palestinians have a right to self-determination, he's clashing heads-on with the perspective of the far right in Israel that denies that very statement, that the Palestinians are a people that have a right to self-determination. Now, what is this right of self-determination? It's not the ability as a people to define their political future. So saying the right of self-determination historically also means eventually that the Palestinians have a right to self-government, to statehood, to some political entity that allows them to express themselves and operate as a people in the international environment. Now, whether it's a full-fledged state with all powers and capabilities, like most people think about, or a state that has limited powers, limited abilities, that could be negotiated. But on the basic principle is in the Trump plan. And I think this is why we are closer to a deal than we have ever been in the last year.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you sharing that with us. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Gidi Grinstein, former Israeli peace negotiator. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Now to France, where the Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu's sudden resignation yesterday, just hours after unveiling his new cabinet, has shocked the political scene. Well, Lecornu, a close ally of President Emmanuel Macron, had been in office for less than a month. Well, his abrupt departure raises fresh questions about what many are calling an increasingly unstable political landscape in France. Well, let's get more now. We can cross to Paris and speak to the French Senator Nathalie Goulet. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Senator. One analyst wrote, "To lose one prime minister is unfortunate, but to lose four looks like a major crisis." Why has France become so politically unstable?
Well, it's came from the president recalling election last year. That's the reason for why he didn't have any majority. He lost his majority by recalling the election after the parliamentary election last year, European election, sorry. So that created a big chaos because the system of the Fifth Republic is working with a majority and is not able to rebuild one.
Right, you make an interesting point. And of course, Lecornu, the fifth prime minister in the last 2 years, was in the office for 27 days. His government lasted 14 hours. That's the shortest-lived prime minister in modern French history. But going back to what you're saying about the Fifth Republic, are there flaws in the structure of the Fifth Republic?
No, the institutions are very strong. It's just that the situation, we have extreme left and we have extreme right. And as a matter of fact, we are losing this majority. And we have engineer of chaos on one side, and that's it. So we have people who want definitely to destabilize the situation and to have a new presidential election. And so the problem is that nobody can negotiate right now. We have a lot of a personal interest from some people, and other people want to focus on general interest. And so we have a definitely conflict of interest.
I mean, the new cabinet angered a lot of people. What was wrong with it? Why were people so upset?
Well, it's a question of balance between the political party and ego. and that unfortunately the constitution cannot deal anything regarding ego of the man,
right,
politician.
So you're saying it wasn't in any way the fault of Sébastien Lecornu, it's the situation he found himself in?
No, maybe some people start to say that he didn't pay attention to the requirement or to some solicitation or some advices, and took such a long time to build his cabinet that finally everybody lost interest and hope and unfortunately trust, because at the end of the day it's a question of trust.
And going back to what we were talking about earlier with regard to the snap election that President Macron called last year, if he hadn't done that, would none of this turmoil have happened?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you blame him entirely?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was a wrong, very, very... And then you have to understand that recalling election in France as a consequences of election in European Parliament was absolutely meaningless, absolutely no link between the situation and no reason to recall election at that time. And it's the fact that he recalled elections that creates this chaos.
So how do we get out of it? Another snap election, or could President Macron resign?
Well, snap election will not bring anything better. A resignation of the president will not bring anything better. I think that the people have to, politicians, the high level of politicians, what we call the oils, of politicians, have to sit around the table and try to find a solution in the best interest of the country. That is the point.
But do you see the impasse being broken by a snap presidential election being held?
I'm not sure. I mean, we need, at this stage, we need a good fortune teller, because it's an unprecedented situation, and we absolutely don't know what happened and what is in the head of the president. I mean, so he has a key now, or he find a new prime minister, probably from the left side, because he tried everything on the right and on the center. Or he recall election again, and we will be again in a very, very unstable situation, because the National Front will win, but probably not with a total majority, so that will create another instability. I mean, it's a very, very tricky situation, very tricky.
President Macron's mandate finishes in May 2027. I mean, do you see him completing it? Is that, or does it look inevitable that he's going to have to go?
No, normally it doesn't have to go. But I mean, we are right now in a very difficult situation, because it's just a probability scenario and everything. So imagine that he recall election, and the most plausible things is that Marine Le Pen and his party will win, but not with MP enough to get a full majority. And then she will ask for the president's resignation. But constitutionally, he has not to resign. No way.
There are some people who are very worried about the situation in France. The markets are worried.
Yes.
France facing downgrades. And some are describing France as the Eurozone's new problem child. Do you see this as being short-lived, or is this a deep crisis?
You know, especially the market, it's a question of trust. And right now, unfortunately, I don't think that my country give a full image of a stable and trusty situation. I hope that this thing will be solved in a very, very short time and near future. I hope that, and a lot of MP with me in my party and in the parliament, we hope that these things will be solved very, very soon.
And just lastly, Senator, how damaging do you think this is to France's international standing and its influence within the European Union and with NATO?
Oh, yes, it's damaging, but you know the worst is for the citizen. Because the citizen, they are watching this political national circus, and they find it disgusting. they have already a full mistrust regarding the politician, but this circus is now just unbearable. So the market, international situation, and everything is something. Market is important, but the trust that the French citizen has to put in their own politician is also very important for the next steps. And right now we are in a very, very bad situation. I'm telling you.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, and thank you for being so generous with your time. French Senator Nathalie Goulet in Paris. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.